Why don't you
I'm
go
very
ahead and
happy to do
introduce
an
yourself
intro while we,
while
yeah, absolutely.
I'm pulling these.
So, yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Dr. James Kelly. I am a medical science liaison and business director for a company called Nutra, the makers of the Prolon 5-day fasting mimicking diet. I've been with the company since the very beginning, about 6 years ago from launch, but I've actually known Dr. Walter Longo, our founder, for over a decade. I completed my MD in sports medicine at Ohio State University with a little bit of my externship in sports med being done out here in Southern California, where I am now. And then I did my MBA at USC, University of Southern California, where I got to know Dr. Longo, and I focused on medical innovation. I've been working with Nutra, as I said, for 6 years. Prior to that, I was with Cleveland Clinic Innovations, doing basically Shark Tank for medicine. So, but I know the product very, very well, but I'll be talking to you guys today a little bit about this 5-day diet that tricks your cells into going into a fasting state and gives you many of the same benefits while still allowing you to eat. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is. Hopefully we've got the slides. If not, I'm very happy to just talk about it too, because I can do that too. So whatever is easiest for you, I will be happy to do.
Okay, let me see if I can get this screen shared.
So, so the first thing, if you're thinking about doing this, if you haven't heard about it, I'll tell you a little bit about what it is. But I would like you guys to think about in the new year. Are there things you're trying to work on, like body weight, maybe waist circumference, energy levels? You want to help support healthy aging as you move through life? Mental clarity, focus, energy. Maybe there's certain biomarkers that are trending the wrong way in your life and you want to focus on those. So there's a number of reasons why you would want to look at your health from a nutrition standpoint, but also from a lifestyle standpoint. But what I want to talk about is sort of a quick kickstart into changing your approach to food, creating better habits, but also seeing very quick results. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So fasting. If you guys want to put it in the chat, I'm always curious to hear who actually participates in some form of fasting. Intermittent fasting is the most popular form of eating in the U.S. if you follow any diet for 4 of the last 5 years. But intermittent fasting means 1 day or less. So typically people who are doing 16-8 or 12-12 fast, where you fast for 12 or 16 hours, and then you eat within 12 or 8 hours. So we're going to talk about something a little bit different here, which is more like prolonged fasting. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Next slide as well. So it's important to define it because people kind of get it wrong. The basic definition of fasting is switching from external to internal energy. And it's not just ketones. I want to be very clear that ketosis is not the same as fasting. When you go into ketosis, you're just going to be burning fat for energy, which you will do when you're in fasting, but it's not going to be triggering the cellular cleanup standpoint. The thing that we look at is driven by something other than ketones. And when you go into a fasting state, you're not just going to use ketones, you're also going to use energy stored in your liver and your muscles. So, but what we look at is really at the cellular level. How does the body know it's in a fasting state? And if it knows it's in a fasting state by a certain signal, we can trick that signal. So once we understand the signals, we understand how to manipulate this pathway. So go ahead and go to the next slide.
Sorry.
There we go. So the biggest question I get asked, so there's 3 things I want you guys to walk away with today. 1, why should I fast? 2, why should I do it for more than a couple of days in a row? And then 3, how are we mimicking that with food? And if you understand that, and obviously the benefits of it, then you kind of get what we're doing here. But the biggest thing about fasting is that it's a threat. If you do it for too long, it's bad for you. But that's exactly why it's something that we've evolved a benefit to respond to. So when you face a threat, your body reacts to protect itself. And fasting is a threat. So the body reacts to protect itself. It stops spending energy on things it can't afford, and it starts spending energy on things that are important, like cleaning up so that it's more efficient in how that it uses energy. So it's more likely to get to the next energy. So it's a process that's actually evolved with us over time. It's probably one of the main drivers of why we're here, because those of us who could survive gaps in resources better were more likely to find the next food, and they were more likely to pass on their DNA. So there's a lot of evolutionary pressure to get good at fasting pretty quick. So the challenge is that nowadays, we don't ever fast. We never do it unless it's by choice, because we're really good at farming, refrigeration, grocery stores, fast food. So we live in times of plenty. We're always in the feast. We're never in the famine. And if we're never in the famine long enough, we're never going to trigger that cleanup. So when you trigger that cleanup, it cleans up a lot of the old, worn out intracellular stuff that can lead to problems and makes your cells act more like renewed, younger versions of themselves. And that's really how we support healthy aging. But there are a number of other benefits too. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So not all fasting is the same. You've got the intermittent fasting is all the way on the left. Prolonged fasting is going to be over on the right. And that's where you really get that deep cellular cleanup. But that really only occurs with either water fasting or with fasting mimicking diets, which is what we do. So if you guys have never tried a water fast, the biggest challenge with it is that it's very hard. You want to go to the next slide, please? So the biggest challenge with water fasting is that it's hard to do. About 95% of people are going to drop out by day 2. So they're just not in it long enough to even start the cleanup process, which doesn't really start until day 2 and takes a couple days to actually clean all the way up. But there's other challenges as well, because you're not going to be getting any of the macronutrients you would normally get. Your body is going to be looking for energy in your muscles if you're just doing a water fast. And about a third of the water you get each day actually comes from your food itself. So if you take away the food, you're already at a big risk of dehydration. So there's a big challenge there with safety. And on top of that, you're also potentially at risk for gallstones. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So if we know that water fasting is hard to do, what do you do? And that's where Dr. Longo comes in. He's the director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California's Leonard Davis School of Anti-Aging Medicine. He's got a professorship in Italy. He's one of the world's leading longevity researchers. And he looked at the longest living people on Earth, called the blue zones, and tried to figure out how they got there. And they all have some stuff in common. They all live a very low stress life. They're active in their later years. They have purpose. They have a lot of time in community. They do all these wonderful things. They eat a low animal protein, high plant-based, Mediterranean-style diet. But there's one group in Ecuador that doesn't do any of that, called the Laron people, L-A-R-O-N. They live a very Western lifestyle. But unlike what we see here in America, they are immune to cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. They never get them. But they're also about 3 feet tall. So it turns out that they have a mutation in this nutrient sensing pathway. And I think you can go to the next slide. So they have a nutrition sensing pathway that tells you when you eat, called IGF-1. And it mainly responds to protein, so animal protein in particular. The Laron people have a mutation in this. So they can eat all the protein they want, and they don't grow. But they also don't get these age-related diseases that are much more common after age 55. Now we know they're probably not actually age-related, they're growth-related. And growth is a major contributor to aging. And protein affects growth, which means now we know exactly where to look and we know what foods to look at. And that's what we spent the next 20 plus years and $50+ million working on, which is fasting mimicking diets. We know the pathways. How do we translate those to some benefits? Go ahead and go to the next slide. So that was where the creation of Prolon comes from. It's a very carefully designed 5-day diet giving you real food. It's plant-based Mediterranean-style food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, soup, snacks, drinks, desserts. We've had about 500,000 people do the diet at this point. So we know it's got great safety data, and it is really, really carefully researched. But here's how it works. If you want to go to the next slide. Next slide after this. So this is what Prolon looks like, but the next slide really tells you how it works. So I think this one might be static. So I think I don't think it's going to be animated, but that's okay. So if you look at regular food, it's going to ramp up all your growth sensing pathways. It's going to trigger all your growth sensors. Your body knows you have food, it knows you have energy, and it makes a lot of copies. But you'll notice that those cells are old and worn out. They still look dirty. And that's because if you are not taking away any energy, you're never triggering the cleanup. So the cells just stay accumulating their gunk throughout your whole life. If you fast, go to the next slide, please. By contrast, if you fast, you drop those pathways all the way to the bottom, and it's not going to show it here because it's not animated, but those cells clean themselves up. They turn a clear crystal blue. So that triggers the cleanup sensing pathways. But you'll notice you didn't have to go all the way to the bottom. You just have to get below that line to trigger the cleanup. So if you go to the next slide, please. So what Dr. Longo and his team figured out is, where is that line? How high in the green can I go and keep those cells clean, but still give you food? And that's what Prolon is. We found the wiggle room in the nutrient sensing pathway, and we crafted food that's the right balance of macro and micronutrients, the right amount, and the right combination. So there's a couple things that go into the diet to make it really carefully stealthy. So even though you can read about what's in it, you can maybe look at it and say, that's not that hard to do. The hard part is putting them together exactly right so that they sneak into the body. So it's not just any 800 calories, it's a specific 800 calories. Day one's about 1,130 calories, and then every day after that's about 800. But what those calories are matters, and also how we put those together. So we do a lot of work to make the food stealthy. Next slide, please. So it's a 5-day journey, and we'll talk a little bit more about the food too as we go along. But day 2 and 3, if you're going to struggle, tend to be the days you struggle. It's very common the first time you go into a fast to get a mild headache on day 2 or 3. It usually goes away on its own, but we'll give you some tips and tricks you can use that would make it a little bit easier on you. Day 4 and 5, people are fully transitioned. They tend to not be that hungry at that point. They feel pretty good. Day 5 is really when people notice a landmark shift where their energy levels go way up. Mental clarity improves. They feel a lot better. They've usually noticed some pounds dropping. Now, everybody's results are different, so I'll tell you what those results in our trials were. But people tend to do pretty well on the diet. By day 5, they kind of are feeling the benefits of doing this. And if anyone's done it, please let us know in the comment section your experience with it. Hopefully it mirrors that. The biggest challenge to it is psyching yourself up to do it. Once you start it, you realize it's really not that hard. You can do anything for 5 days. And once you get through day 2 to 3 in your transition, it's kind of just coasting through to the end. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So here's what it is, because it is really carefully designed. It's about 10% protein, about 45% sugar and carbs, and about 45% fat. That's easy enough. And it's about 770 to 800 calories on day 2 through 5. Those are also pretty easy. You could probably, if you're really, really careful, get something similar at home. The hard part is the composition. So we give you a thing called the L bar in the mornings, which is nuts, macadamia, honey, coconut. It's a delicious bar. It has about 8 grams of honey in it. If I give you 8 grams of honey, it'll kick you right out of the fast. But if I give you the 8 grams emulsified in the right amount of macadamia and coconut oils and a high amount of plant-based chicory root inulin fiber, I can lower the glycemic load and index. And now I don't trigger your growth pathways. I hide from the body. It's like a time-release capsule. So I can provide quite a bit of carbs on the diet without kicking your cells out of a fasting state. I also give you something on day 2 through 5 called the L drink. So one of the things you may notice is that the box is the same size for everybody. And there's a couple reasons we do that. I don't want to bore everyone with biochem, but body size doesn't correlate to how quickly your cells go into a fasting state. The larger people, their cells are the same size as yours and mine. They don't need a bigger box. If they get a bigger box, it may not send them into a fasting state. But they do have more muscle, and I want to preserve their muscle, not their fat, just their muscle. When you're going into fasting, your body can use several different things for energy. It uses your liver and your muscles as well as your fat. If I give you what's in the L drink, which is glycerin, your body will use that instead of what's in your muscles. So it's one of the ways we preserve lean body mass. So the cool thing about glycerin is that you can't absorb it when you're not fasting. It only works when you're fasting. When you're fasting, it isn't registered by the body the way sugar is. So it doesn't trigger your growth pathways. So it's another way we get some stealth energy into you. So again, this is, even though it is plant-based real food, it's incredibly technically designed, very carefully put together, very high tech to deliver you these results while still sneaking in the most food possible. Next slide, please. So we have a couple different flavors. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. You can talk about which ones do you do, but I want to talk about how you do on it. So in our clinical trials, we had regular everyday people do 3 cycles over 3 months. So they're doing 5 days each month for 3 months. And in between cycles and afterwards, they didn't change anything else. They just did those 3 cycles. And they lived their regular lives. They went back to their regular diet. And what we saw is over in the total of 15 days, they lost an average of about 5.7 pounds, about 1.6 inches off their waist. And most importantly, it was the right weight loss. They lost visceral fat, which is the bad, unhealthy fat that surrounds your organs in your midsection. So it is kind of a targeted fat loss while maintaining lean body mass and improving your BMI. So you're losing the right weight from the right areas while keeping most of your muscle. And even if you just do 1 cycle, you still lose quite a bit of weight and some waist circumference. It just doesn't last as long. It's sort of like going to the gym. You've got to get in shape for the results to really last. It's the same with nutrition. It's good for you if you do it once, and you will see benefits and you will feel a lot of great benefits. But in order to maintain those in the long run, you got to stick with something fairly regularly. I really encourage everybody to consider doing 3 months in a row. If you want to try it the first month, see how you do, I understand that too before committing to the next couple. But I really encourage people to look at doing 3 months in a row. That's where we see the longest lasting and most significant benefit. And again, it's just 5 days a month, and we did all the thinking for you. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So it does a couple things. We talked about the weight loss. We talked about the body composition. It also helps support metabolic balance by helping maintain healthy levels of systolic blood pressure. It impacts a number of other markers. And most importantly, it triggers cellular cleanup. So I'm not sure if I was super clear on it earlier, but if you're just living your everyday life, even if you're super healthy and right where you want to be, you've still been accumulating damage your whole life. Your body has a mechanism that when you take away nutrition for a couple of days, it will turn off the growth and turn on the cleanup through a process called autophagy or autophagy, which literally translates to self-eating, autophagy. It's the process by which your cells will naturally clean themselves up. And if you're not fasting for a couple of days in a row, you're never going to do that. So we know that we do that in our clinical trials. We've shown that. So go ahead and go to the next slide. The other benefits, I talked about cardiovascular health, talked about healthy aging support and metabolic health. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I mentioned that multiple cycles leads to lasting results. This is pretty interesting. If you do it once, you're going to regain about half the weight over the next couple of weeks to month. If you do it 3 times, though, we measure people almost 4 months later, and they still had 2/3 of the benefits. That's pretty interesting. If they're not doing anything different, they're just doing 5 days of this each month. And the first time they're regaining half the weight over a month. The second time they're regaining less. The third time they're not even regaining 1/3 of it over 4 months. So that's a really significant internal change, and they did nothing else different other than just 5 days of diet. So that's one of the reasons why I would highlight that it's really important to consider doing this intervention multiple times. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We have a lot of research behind this. We also know we can help support you on this diet pretty effectively. We have a great team. We have great coaching and resources available for you, but we know it does a lot of great stuff. I know it's just 5 days, but it's a deep clean for your body in those 5 days. It's going to help support healthy aging, metabolic balance. It'll help support healthy levels of systolic blood pressure. There's just a lot that it does. And it's really not the food that's doing it. It's your own body. Every cell in your body has this built-in mechanism. We are just activating the pathways that we were all built with. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So we know, in addition to all of that stuff, this is actually why I do the diet. So I talked to you about all the little markers and all the levels that get affected. The biggest thing, though, to me, is the behavioral reset. If you're having trouble adopting a healthier lifestyle, if you are struggling with cravings, if you have brain fog like I did, you'll notice after you finish the diet how you feel. We've surveyed thousands of our customers, and the most popular answer is that it's much easier to make healthy choices after the 5 days. Your carb cravings are controlled, your attitude towards food changes, energy levels are typically higher, mental clarity goes up, focus goes up. These are very, very common results that people get reported to us. You realize you don't need as much food, so portion control is better. I, being from Ohio, crave steak and Cheetos, but I know that those are bad for me. And the only way that I really kick that habit is with this diet. I actually use it as kind of a get out of jail free mental reprogramming. So if you're having trouble adapting to a new diet, or you hate salad and you want to start the new year off right, this is a great way to reprogram your brain. It really does that. We know from our other clinical trials, we looked at the hormone levels that regulate hunger and cravings and how full you feel, and we know we impact those. We also know from our survey data that we actually just change your attitude around food. So, and it's a nice break from a lot of the stuff you would be eating during the 5 days too. So if you drink a lot of caffeine, you're going to want to wean down ahead of time. It might be a little break for that. You can sort of reset your taste buds a little bit, so you need less sweeteners, things like that. So next slide, please. So after this, next slide, please. So there are a couple people that shouldn't do it. So if you're on this and you're wondering if this is the right thing for you, if you're allergic to anything in the diet, unfortunately, there is no nut-free version of the diet. So if you're allergic to nuts, it's not the right thing for you. If your body weight is below 18.5 BMI, you've got to have enough visceral fat to do well on this diet. There is also, if you are currently ill or were recently sick with COVID or something like that, no one's done a study. So no one really knows whether this is something that you can do right after COVID. So if you're concerned about that at all, check with your clinician as to whether or not you're the right candidate for this diet. We don't have great studies. Nobody does. So it's a little bit of a guesswork. So if you have any specific health considerations, you're going to want to work with Randy on that one. I'm very happy to talk to her. Unfortunately, we can't give any specific medical advice. So if you do have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but just know that I can't comment on things like medication. So next slide, please. There are some things that I think everyone can do to make their experience better on the diet if you are thinking about doing it. Number one is stay active and get plenty of water. There are a lot of things people can experience when they first go into this diet. Headache, fatigue, and weakness are the most common. Hunger is obviously a side effect of eating less calories. And then on day 2 or 3, people can have some difficulty concentrating. Feeling cold is also a good sign that you're going into a fasting state, but also can be uncomfortable. So your body will naturally lower your heart rate and blood pressure when you go into a fasting state. So you may feel a little bit chilly. So stay hydrated, stay active. But if you're somebody who works out really, really hard, you're going to want to take it easy for these 5 days. We don't want you getting too lightheaded, running out of energy, or releasing any of the growth signals from your muscles. So just take it easy with exercise. Again, I can't give you specific recommendations, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to work with you on that. If you are a big caffeine drinker, unfortunately, caffeine does slightly reactivate one of these pathways that we're trying to quiet down. Even though we think coffee is a great longevity agent, when you're in a fast, it's not super compatible. You can only have about 8 to 12 ounces of coffee per day. No cream, no sweetener. So if you are a big caffeine drinker, go ahead and wean down your caffeine. But still have your cup of coffee. It's going to help you get through the diet. And if you need it, you can take aspirin, Aleve, or Tylenol as directed during it. So you can still take pain meds. Next slide, please. We do think people should stop all their supplements unless they're on hormone supplements during the diet, because they might interact with it. You can generally do without supplements for 5 days. So we just want to minimize any potential interaction. But if you're on something like a thyroid support supplement or a female or male hormone supplement, you may want to continue those for the 5 days. If your body's adapted to them, it shouldn't impact the outcome at all. Go ahead, go to the next slide. Oh, and I do recommend don't get in the sauna during this. You might find yourself getting pretty lightheaded. There are some things you can add to the diet. I think the diet tastes pretty good. It's designed by Italian food scientists. But if you do want to kick it up a notch, you can add a tablespoon of dried herbs or spices each day, or a teaspoon of sea salt, as long as you don't have any contraindications to that. You could do 2 slices of lemon in water or whatever you want to put them in for flavoring. Don't eat them, but you can use them for flavoring. You can chew 2 pieces of sugar-free gum. You can drink any herbal tea you want, as long as it's caffeine-free, 0 calorie, no sweeteners. And you can have any type of sparkling water, same rules. If you don't want to drink coffee, you can have 2 cups of black or green tea. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. So I know I gave you guys quite a bit of info. I just want to reiterate, the magic is not really our diet. Our diet has figured out how to keep your body fed, keep your lean body mass preserved, and keep you busy while your cells do what they were designed to do. So all we're doing here is activating this baked-in evolutionary process in every cell in your body. So there's going to be a lot of benefits. You can do anything for 5 days. Some people find it more challenging than others. So I really encourage people to do this as a group, because that's really how you're going to get through some of the days. I would also note there's quite a bit of fiber in the diet. So if you're somebody who doesn't eat enough fiber, or maybe you eat enough, but you're not eating rooted vegetables, you may notice some bloating and gassiness in the middle of the diet. That's pretty common whenever anybody changes their dietary pattern significantly. But in our diet in particular, there's quite a bit of fiber. So don't be alarmed if you see that. But beyond that, the biggest challenges people tend to have is day 2 and 3, just persevering. So it always helps to be at a group, to stay communicative, to do it with a buddy, and just know that you can do it. So it's never as hard as I think it's going to be, but I always have to make sure that I'm mindful in the middle, that I keep going. So it's a good commitment to show that you got some internal fortitude. And I think it's a great way to start the new year. So I'll open it up to questions, but thank you guys so much for your patience and for working with me on this. Let me see what's in the chat. So,
James, we have 2. Someone said I fasted and did a weight loss program that did help. Judy said that to us. So thanks, Judy. I'm glad. Okay. And then Kelly said I did fast. And on day 2, I was tired and weak, and I didn't make it to day 4 or 5 while also taking supplements following a program. So I'm not sure what program Kelly was on. I know it wasn't this one.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that it is very common for people to feel lightheaded or weak whenever anybody does any type of low calorie diet or fasting. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I think our diet, we have about a 95% success rate. So people tend to do pretty well. So hopefully that won't be a challenge with this, but the whole point of it is to make fasting feasible. So hopefully we've done what we think we have, and people tend to do really well. So hopefully that won't be a concern for you on this one. Most people tend to sail through it.
Mm-hmm. We also are giving away Dr. Longo's book, The Longevity Diet, for anyone who buys their first kit. Wonderful book. And that's free. That's part of our gift to you. And you also get a free 20-minute nutrition counseling session with one of the nutritionists at Johns Hopkins who's trained in the Prolon diet to help you get set on the right track. Mm-hmm. So that's exciting.
And you get texts and tips every day if you sign up for the emails, which I highly encourage everybody to do, so you know what's happening inside you each day, and just gives you a little bit more insight into what you're doing, as well as encouragement as well. So,
anyone have any other questions for Dr. Kelly?
So the most common ones are usually about exercise and supplements, and maybe what to do afterwards. So if you haven't ordered yet, one of the things I can tell everybody, if you want to make your life a little bit easier going into this, a lot of clinicians will put their patients on a Mediterranean-style rooted vegetable dense diet that's light in red meat. So you cut back on the red meats, you start transitioning your body over towards the types of foods you're going to eat on this, and that will help get your gut more primed. It'll help you transition to the diet easier. We do offer a day 6 transition guide, which I'm also going to offer to Randy, and she can distribute to you guys. That'll give you a little bit of, in our trials, people did not prep for the diet and they did not do anything afterwards. But we know in real world that your life can be a little easier. So we're going to give you guys that too.
Thank you. That's wonderful, James. Thanks a lot. All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but if anything comes up, you guys, you know where to find me, and I can absolutely get a hold of James. Oh, someone said, how often do you need this? Question several times a year.
Yeah, so the general recommendations are that you should work with your clinician to determine what's right for you. Most people, if they're right where they want to be and they just want to get that cellular cleanup and maybe the longevity benefits, et cetera, maybe just a little bit of weight loss, once every quarter seems to be where your body really, after about 3 to 4 months, your body starts to need a reminder. There's no magic bullet. Unfortunately, our bodies are very good at storing things. So you just have to keep reminding it. A little bit older people do want to do it once every quarter. If you're a little bit younger and maybe right where you want to be, you could maybe get away with once every 6 months. That seems to be, if you do some type of prolonged fasting every 3 to 6 months, for anybody over mid to late 40s, probably going to be a little more frequent every 3 to 4 months. But if you do have goals that you need to reach, I would encourage everybody to consider following our clinical trial protocol of 3 cycles over 3 months and then evaluate. So once a month for 3 months, evaluate how you did, and then maybe transition to that maintenance where you do it less often. That's really where we do see people do the best. And again, it's just 5 days. So, and once you do those initial 3 months, you never have to do the 3 months in a row again. If you've reached your goals, you can then go to the maintenance. So.
Wonderful.
Great question. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, James, thanks so much. It was great to see you and talk with you again. I appreciate very much you doing this for us. I feel very privileged. I know that you are a very busy man and you've got an awful lot going on at your company.
I really, really appreciate your flexibility. Thank you so much for being such a champ. You guys are lucky to work with Randy. She's so wonderful. So I'm excited for you guys to go through this with her and start the new year off right. But thank you so much for rolling with me on this. I really appreciate it. My sincerest gratitude. So let me know how I can help support as you guys do this. I'll be around, and we have a great team that can answer any questions you guys might have.
And I'm also very excited to see what's coming out of all those trials you guys have going on. I know you can't talk about a lot right now because the results aren't out yet, but I found out
a couple things yesterday, so really? I'll share with you, Randy. Yeah, but we'll talk about it. So there's some really exciting stuff coming.
Yeah,
in the near future.
These guys are leading the way. Dr. Longo was one of the keynote speakers at the Functional Medicine Conference this year, one of the coveted positions. And so it's like, this is really cutting edge science, you guys. This is very, very cool. So I know we're going to help people. If we can reset metabolic balance and change some of those markers inside the body, everybody's going to benefit. We're going to live healthier, longer lives and be happier while we're doing it. So, all right. Thanks, James.